Well, let me welcome everyone to our webinar today, how to evaluate the return on investment of artificial intelligence. Before we begin, I'll start with a brief intro. My name is Steve Meier. I'm one of the co-founders of KUNGFU.AI. I've actually been in the technology sector for a little over 17 years, and I've almost exclusively been in the Fortune 500 technology sector in a variety of different roles. But most recently, prior to Kung Fu, I led a digital strategy team, helping some of my Fortune 500 tech clients like IBM how to embrace some of the newer artificial intelligence and just general digital strategies. I have a certificate out of MIT in the business implications of artificial intelligence, which is really all about strategy and adoption of AI. And I'm super excited to have this conversation with you today, representing Kung Fu AI. And in case you aren't familiar with us, we are a services firm focused on helping companies with artificial intelligence strategy, building highly specialized AI solutions in areas like computer vision, NLP, and predictive, and also helping organizations transform around artificial intelligence so they can own that capability. So we get a good purview on how companies are seeing ROI return on artificial intelligence and how they think about it, and ultimately the problems they hope to produce it. It's an important conversation right now, and there's a lot going on and a lot being published on what we can learn from people who are seeing great success and those that are reporting seeing little success. So in part, we must understand why the winners are winning and why the laggards are not. And it's interesting because the data is showing some very significant patterns where the AI Maturity Index, and this is published out of a book we highly recommend, Competing in the Age of AI, which is a Harvard Business Review publication from just last year. They did a survey of what they would call the leaders of artificial intelligence, meaning the ones that are adopting it successfully and the ones that are adopting it, but perhaps less successfully. And they are seeing great divide in what they're reporting in terms of 3-year average gross margin across the board, 3 years earnings, in 3 years average net income, where you're seeing the leaders reporting significantly better performance. And just an anecdotal case study, which I find fascinating, and we often look to Amazon as one of those leaders in artificial intelligence and using it successfully to transform their business inside and out. One of the former heads of machine learning at AWS, Charles Elkin, was quoted in this Fast Company article stating, "Our biggest AI win at Amazon was several $billion in revenue," which translates to maybe 100 million in profit, because the retail business is actually relatively low margin business, which is outstanding, right? We all wish we could see that type of return. So how? And another thing we're noticing is we're seeing a gap. If you look at the Jeffrey Moore's crossing the chasm curve, we are seeing a widening gap between the early majority and the late majority in terms of what they are producing from a return standpoint. And the ones that are starting earlier and are leveraging it successfully are starting to amass an advantage that the laggards are going to have a hard time keeping up with. And what that gap is, it's around talent. They have a talent advantage because they were able to staff and build their team sooner. There's a market advantage where they're starting to build and roll out capabilities that are highly differentiated, leveraging artificial intelligence. And most importantly, they have a data advantage where they have been working to build up a deep reservoir of highly structured, highly actionable information, which they can learn from and turn into meaningful capabilities that either helps the business become more effective or helps the product that they produce or the solution they produce become more differentiated. And all of these things are widening that gap as they are getting a head start. Still seeing the same curve that we showed in the previous slide, looking at what happens with innovators and what percentage of innovators end up becoming market leaders, all the way through laggards on the tail end. What you are seeing is two groups. And these groups are adopting new technology, and you're seeing that adoption curve in blue. And then in yellow, you are seeing the market share, where eventually we hit a saturation point where the laggards will command less of the market share, because when an emerging technology comes out, there's just a point in time that's too late. Now, what gets even more interesting is that they start to calculate about what period of time are we seeing that market saturation between an emerging technology's breakthrough, and then when it becomes more of a commodity technology where only laggards who are adopting it come into the fold, about 12 to 15 years. And past that 12 to 15 years time horizon, it's usually the point of no return. So the question becomes, as we see this pattern happen time and time again with emerging technologies, how does this translate to artificial intelligence? Well, the clock started in 2012, where the first breakthrough use cases were really rolling out into production with some sort of measurable impact, which puts us out to roughly 2024 to 2027. And according to some research by Dr. Paco Nathan of KUNGFU.AI, his study looked at several points where deep learning was the breakthrough technology in AI adoption beginning in 2012. So he estimates roughly 12 years later, the ship has sailed, and either you are leveraging artificial intelligence apps internally or externally, or your competition has taken over. So why is this conversation important? Well, there's a bit of urgency behind helping you all and helping businesses build an ROI case and find return on artificial intelligence, because this technology becomes very, very important, and the time horizon in which you can adopt it and do so successfully is closing. So the presentation today charts out to answer a couple key questions. First, if there are leaders and laggards, what can we learn from the laggards, and how do we set ourselves up to reap the benefits of the leaders? First, we must understand there are obstacles to artificial intelligence and be mindful of the gaps so we can either hop over them or walk around them. And when it comes to artificial intelligence, and we see this all the time, that there are classic reasons why projects fail. And if you fail early, it's natural to have a bad impression and perhaps retreat from trying to figure out this AI thing. Now, these top reasons span the gamut. First, it's lack of vision or not having any understanding of how to apply artificial intelligence to the business. And simply, it's not having the right people. Perhaps we don't have the right visioning people, or we don't have enough of the tactical execution folks to build these solutions in-house. The number one problem I would say that we often see is just having bad data, either not having enough information, not having enough of the right information, or not having information in the proper order to leverage advanced machine learning models. There's huge issues with culture and change management. Some cultures and some issues with rolling out new capabilities really die at the culture phase or at the process phase. We see a lot of people arguing over how to apply artificial intelligence and in what priority. So there's just classic business challenges, right? Consensus dysfunction, a lot of technology debt and technology silos that are building data reservoirs that perhaps are really valuable to the business, but are generally inaccessible by certain groups. And finally, it's just not knowing where to start. So all of these things can be blockers or stop people from seeing early success with the technology. And it's fundamental to understand that AI takes time and it takes practice. It's not expected for you to find famous returns out of the gate, but if you start small and optimize for achievable metrics, it's a great starting point. And through that, you will learn a lot, and it will help advance you in your success horizon and future capabilities. So looking at some more data, this time coming out of Deloitte, they asked, if you're using artificial intelligence successfully, what types of applications and business objectives are you trying to tackle using the technology, and start to have them ranked first, second, and third in terms of primary benefits of using the technology. And this is from 2017, and there's been some movement, but generally this list from our perspective is the same, where most people are trying to apply artificial intelligence and they're looking at it from a top line perspective. They're trying to roll it out into products and solutions. That generally still holds true, as well as internally making better decisions, using your information for some sort of competitive advantage or enterprise intelligence always makes a ton of sense. What we are seeing change is we are starting to see less folks use artificial intelligence to inform what new products to create. However, they are rolling out artificial intelligence as a new product opportunity. Now, what we are seeing rise to the top of the list are more around optimizing internal business operations and freeing up people for other tasks. So automating a lot of routine tasks. A lot of what is called robotic process automation becomes very, very important, especially in a post-pandemic world. We are trying to become more efficient. We are more digitally enabled, and there's a lot of opportunity to do that with AI. Now, what's interesting here is, as I mentioned before, it takes time and practice. There is a flywheel effect when it comes to adopting artificial intelligence, where the ones who are reporting better return have been doing it for a little bit longer, have been trying different projects, and have many successes under their belt. So what we are seeing here, and this is the same Deloitte information, we started to ask people, how many deployments, if you're seeing benefit at all, how many deployments do you actually have out there? And as you noticed, the ones that are claiming to see significant or substantial or moderate benefit reflected in the red and the purple, those ones have multiple deployments into production. So not POCs and not AI experiments, but true artificial intelligence capabilities, whether they be internal information or they might be external product. They have multiple of these tools out there. So you're starting to see the flywheel effect of the more people try, the more that they learn, sometimes learning through failure, and ultimately success starts to build on one another and breed more success. But again, in the recent study from McKinsey, we are starting to see a widening gap in terms of benefit reported and the number of implementations out there between power users and laggards. So taking a look at the leaders, how are they maximizing return on investment? Well, they build on a solid foundation. This is a great framework from our friends at Emerge, and there are critical capabilities that one needs to have established if they want to have the greatest propensity to roll out artificial intelligence that produces return successfully. And it really boils down to three key areas: skill, culture, and resource, where skills is having enough of the educational awareness from the top down of what AI is and is not, all the way down to having the right people in place, the engineers, the data scientists, the DevOps folks. Having those skill sets in-house become important, not a deal breaker. But there's also cultural considerations where you have to have a culture of experimentation. You have to have a culture of R&D, a culture of trying new things and truly wanting to be innovative and change as the markets change from underneath you. You have to value data, and there has to be great cross-functional collaboration. Resources is really about having data and having a lot of the digital technologies underneath you that enables a lot of artificial intelligence. But if I were to distill down what's most important here and rank them in somewhat of an order, I would say, first of all, value data as an asset, as a corporate asset that you think adds to the corporate value structure of the enterprise, and invest in that asset. It's imperative that you have at least a baseline understanding of machine learning and the use cases and where it could and should not be applied. It's good to have a baseline system for then taking that data and being able to collect it in relatively the right places and be able to refine it becomes important. But also know how to hire the right folks to help you produce these projects internally, whether they be product managers or DevOps folks or software engineers or data scientists, or even bringing your own ML team in-house. Know how to hire those people. And if not, know how to partner and know how to evaluate your partners. And ultimately, select a use case and a business case. It's important that not only you pick something that seems very functional and useful to the business, but know how to measure return on if that utility is going to be performing in a measurable, impactful way than what you're currently doing today. And if you do just those things, you're going to be on a really solid trajectory into finding success with artificial intelligence projects, regardless if you have all this other stuff in place. Interesting McKinsey data as they start to distill down what some of the leaders and laggards are reporting in terms of how they are approaching artificial intelligence and what matters to them to making these projects get out the door successfully. We're seeing a lot of the same things, but it's good to see it from multiple data sources. It's having tight alignment between your strategy and your business goals to how you apply AI. It's investing in internal upskilling, cross-skilling of talent, but also hiring AI talent. It's having good collaboration between cross-functional teams. It's about applying data and having great practice for ingesting and storing information. It's having great standards, protocols, methodologies, and also just ensuring adoption happens. There's a huge, again, change management issue with AI, and it's important that you rethink your process to get this stuff out the door successfully. What I love here is BCG does an amazing job actually coming up with a recipe for success for applying artificial intelligence. And they actually start to quantify, if you add these components, how does it change the likelihood you will see success? Which I think is a fabulous way of looking at it. Now, many times, and we hear this quite frequently, is that they say, hey, Kung Fu, really enjoy what you have to say. We're very interested in working with you on producing some sort of machine learning capability. However, we have this large digital transformation initiative, and we have to figure that out first before we can start thinking about AI. And it's not necessarily a illogical way of thinking about how to approach artificial intelligence. You need digital transformation. You need somewhat of a foundation to build AI on top of. However, if you have a digital transformation first strategy, you actually only have, according to BCG, roughly a 5% chance of seeing success or return reported from AI. So now that's not the dog. It's the tail, where having a plan for what capabilities you would like to produce or what parts of the business you would like to improve through digital transformation becomes more imperative than thinking about it the other way around. Now, if you have digital transformation and good education around artificial intelligence, meaning the business understands it, they generally know how to apply it, but they also have a strategy on how they want to apply it. So having both a game plan and some digital transformation underway, it increases your odds to roughly 1 in 5 of reporting great return. Now, if you take all the things I just mentioned and also are starting to roll out capabilities, but not one-off capabilities, not POCs or experiments, but really starting to find low-hanging fruit across the business broadly, you now have roughly a 40% chance of reporting strong ROI. And if you do all of those things and add this one last very important piece, meaning change management or knowing how to roll these capabilities out and put them in the hands of your internal teams or your customer and help them learn how to use it and work with it, that gives you the most opportunity to see significant benefit from artificial intelligence. In fact, businesses that make changes on many processes are 6x more likely to realize significant financial benefit than those making no changes to process or only small changes. So again, it becomes so important to not only think about the capability and building the capability, think about the now what, we have this great capability, we think it's going to work fabulously. How do we put it in the hands of real people? And how do we change our processes to wrap around this new ability? Simply, when it comes to reporting strong ROI, it's important to know how to measure ROI and know what ROI to measure, which is probably going to be a little bit more counterintuitive to many. We see this all the time, and the research supports that people just generally have a hard time measuring business impact of technology. It's tougher in different functions, it's tougher with people from different backgrounds. It's even harder when it comes to emerging technology like AI machine learning. And many folks look for the nail with the hammer. So they say, wouldn't it be amazing if we could have this forward-leaning churn prediction capability? And they don't yet know if churn prediction is a problem in the organization. Maybe they do it well enough and they don't know if it's a priority, but they know AI can do it and they say, hey, let's charge. And that starts to hurt your ability to actually find success. Oftentimes, and maybe unlike churn prediction, people are looking to increase brand equity, or they're trying to increase how people report back how they feel about the product, or they're trying to measure using artificial intelligence in ways that are hard to quantify. And they just don't know how to quantify it or don't have any mechanisms in the business today to quantify some of these more softer challenges or ones that maybe have lagging indicators of business performance. So it's important that you just pick a problem that is maybe easier to quantify when you're getting out of the gate. So going back, this is the second part of the quote that I shared with you in the beginning of our time together. This is Charles Elkin again, and he's the former head of machine learning at Amazon. So he continues on and says, well, how do you get a win of several $1 billion in revenue, as we are all very curious about? We improve a business that already has several tens of billions of dollars in revenue. There's no secret there. Start with something big, and then if you can marginally improve it, you can see great return. So that's another way to look at things, right? It's a really novel and successful way to think about this, in that let's pick a problem that already has a strong business case behind it, but let's not think about just radically replacing a process or changing the game, but let's look at something that already works really, really well, and let's improve that by a small percentage. And what type of gain would we see in that scenario, which is a great way. And then now go look for an artificial intelligence thing to do. Sometimes people see ROI in a very binary way, and they don't understand that there's actually multiple ways to think about return on investment. And if you can have the mechanisms to measure all different types of ROI, you're going to increase your likelihood of finding ROI. So 3 types of ROI, again, this is teed up really nicely from our friends at Emerge. There's measurable ROI, there's strategic ROI, and there's capability ROI. Where measurable ROI is going to be your classic ROI. It's if I put money in, I want to get multiples of money out, and I want that over a period of time. However, measurable ROI isn't necessarily just on dollars and cents, $100,000 in, I want $1 million back type of metrics. Those are usually lagging indicators, and sometimes you build successful solutions, but the measurable part are more leading indicators, for example, like conversion metrics. We are going to have a better email open rate, a better click-through rate on certain products, and we are seeing better conversions in that regard. And we know if we can lift that, we will see better sell-through on the cart side, for example, right? All measurable ROI, there's just leading and lagging indicators. There is also strategic ROI, often forgotten, but this is often measured in time saved. For example, if we can make the business more efficient, more agile, for example, because that's a strategic thrust. If we want to become more of a digitally optimized business, or artificial intelligence can do this, maybe there isn't a way to measure how digitally optimized we are today versus tomorrow, but it's a strategic thrust. And if we can forward that mission, that's a success for us. That's okay. And sometimes strategic ROI is measured in corporate value. How can artificial intelligence help us launch a new product that we wouldn't otherwise be able to have, create a differentiated capability that's important to the business? And this is often measured in CapEx or corporate value. And then, and this is so important and underappreciated, there's capability ROI. So this is measuring how well the organization increases their own education and ability to themselves be able to look for AI opportunities, build these projects, and deploy them successfully. It's similar to how do you quantify the investment of getting an advanced degree? Well, the learning itself is intrinsically valuable. However, that learning is applied quite successfully, and we all can agree on that advanced degrees and furthering your knowledge is super important to producing in the business. It actually increases your intellectual capital. The smarter your people are, the more that they know, the smarter the business is in the aggregate. So having capability ROI becomes really important. Is by doing projects, you're going to learn how to do projects. You're going to learn how to think about artificial intelligence. You're going to learn how to roll it out. You're going to learn how to program it. You're going to learn how to integrate it. All of these things are skills you must learn, and just doing it will help you learn it. But it will also help with areas of recruiting, perhaps retention. All of these things are couched as kind of the softer skills, the people skills, the intellectual capital, all capability ROI. Good quote here. Every AI project should not only be guiding a firm towards near-term measurable ROI and towards long-term strategic outcome. Every AI project should be an investment in a company's ability to leverage AI to win in the market. So a good quote talking more towards appreciating capability ROI and understand again the leading versus the lagging indicators that organizations who learn and internalize the capability do increase their likelihood to seeing significant benefit. So though it can't necessarily one-for-one be measured as an internal rate of return, for example, it does for the business in many ways that may be more measured in leading indicators. So how does one set their initial projects up for success? Put yourself on the path to increasing propensity to see return. Well, we have a couple thoughts from industry, and we have a couple of do's and don'ts here. According to PwC, they think the most important thing is to focus on finding a business problem and then seeing if you have data and then seeing if artificial intelligence is appropriate. And thinking about those things in that order becomes very important. According to Gartner, they want you to think small. I love this because AI seems to be such a big thinking, innovative approach to generally everything. And we hear in the news on how this is the most disruptive emerging technology we've perhaps ever seen. And it's all big picture stuff, right? But what we at Kung Fu like to advise our customers is think small when it comes to AI. Dream big, but start really, really small and deploying on narrow use cases, meaning tiny problems that have good return, where we're not boiling the ocean, but we're solving things in small time intervals that have decent return on them. And doing a lot of those small, narrow use cases in aggregate will help you see the best outcome in the totality. And according to IBM, success depends on the data. This is so important to understand that if two businesses who are highly competitive are using the exact same artificial intelligence capability, one can differentiate from the other still. And how they do that is through the data they have. So the ones that have better information, regardless if they are using the exact machine learning capability, the one with better information will have the better capability and can still differentiate purely on data and information. Project selection, very, very important. A couple of do's and don'ts to that point. Pick a problem that can be quantified and you can quantify the benefit. So at the end of the day, if you find a problem you'd like to solve and you are currently measuring how successfully you are solving it today, and you know the type of lift you're looking to see with applying things like artificial intelligence to it, that's a great way to start. Don't pick an AI technology and say, hey, I hear AI can do this. It seems relevant to my space. Let's see if we can pull it off. Because though sometimes you will see success, more likely than not, it won't work the way you want it to. Include cross-functional teams in these conversations, include data scientists if you have them, put them in the room with engineers, put them in the room with the C-suite and corporate strategy leaders, and allow them to align on what problem you're looking to solve and how you go about solving it and how you go about rolling it out, and get all of those stakeholders' perspective, because that will give you the best space and likelihood to land on something that won't see any blockers or stumble opportunities down the road. And definitely don't begin your AI journey without feeling like you have a solid grasp on how to apply the technology. So if you're just looking for something super small you can do at the end of this conversation that will put you on a path and increase your likelihood of seeing a return on your AI projects, just get educated. That would be a fantastic first step in the right direction. And just be aware, some problems are easier to measure than others. Predictive maintenance, for example, is easy to calculate maintenance costs. So that's a great way to think about artificial intelligence. And if we just solved anticipation on these maintenance tasks, we can perhaps easily calculate the return on that. But understanding the customer more effectively using AI, or lifting customer experience, these are important problems to solve, but understand they are a little bit harder to measure. Know that there are likely more leading indicators to measure than lagging indicators before you move forward, because even though you might be seeing benefit, you can't measure the benefit. It's hard for the business to continue to support that project. Andrew Ng is a famous thought leader in the artificial intelligence space. He is one of the founding fathers, so to speak, on a lot of the modern techniques and technology we are using. And he also educates a lot of the market on how to think about this stuff. And he, like others, support the idea of starting small with artificial intelligence projects, pilot things, narrow things in limited capacity, shoot for wins that you can find in just a few months or under a year time frame. Don't start with these massive moonshot type projects that may take multiple years to roll out or multiple years to see return. Those projects are easier to pull off if you're in the I have several deployments under my belt camp. And that's why the ones that have the several key wins, small wins under their belt, can now take the moonshots. And if they can hit, that puts them into the next stratosphere in terms of reported capability and reported return. And again, I said this several times, I'm going to say it again, do not discount the importance of change management and how do we roll this capability out and how do we educate our people to use this thing and not be intimidated or afraid of it. So a couple of case studies just to give you real world examples of things that we've worked on that have proven return, and it'll give you a good sense of different types of things you can measure when you're thinking about artificial intelligence projects. Whereas this particular use case might not be exactly what you're looking for, you can at least see how people are measuring success in these different scenarios. So one, for example, is a recommendation engine. So these tools are really wildly applicable to most types of businesses. And on one side of the fence, you might be a retail or an e-commerce business, or you might be in the insurance space, and you're just trying to recommend products or services through an online channel. And on the other hand, you might be a business just interested in prescriptive analytics, and you want a tool that can recommend a series of decisions that one could take and give people some advice on what decision to take. That is also either prescriptive analytics or recommendation engine, fairly interchangeably in some of this respect. Now, we worked with a real estate company, and here they wanted to produce a recommendation engine, but this was bottled up as an email tool. Whereas you're in real estate and you are an agent and working with a customer, you are going to be always looking at the MLS and the market, and you're going to be picking a subset of properties that you think are perfect for your customer. You're going to push those capabilities or those homes out via email and say, hey, check out these homes. Let me know if you want to see any of them. Well, that's a very human, a very labor intensive capability where instead what Realty Austin wanted to do is automate much of that capability and automate it in a more effective way than what their current automation tools and what their current brokers and agents can do. So we deployed a machine learning recommendation tool that basically understands the users and their behaviors and what they clicked on and things that they've mentioned are important to them, and looks at all the properties that are hitting inventory, and it basically curates a subset of homes that we think the user is likely going to want to see and perhaps even buy. And we're going to curate that and send it via email automation. So what was really interesting about doing this is success was not measured in necessarily return on investment, because this email utility can't necessarily sell homes, but it sets people up down the funnel to then purchase a home. So what success was measured here were things like open rate and click-through rate. And by using data and machine learning in this form of automation, we were seeing significant lift, not only from Realty Austin's benchmarks, but from industry average in both open rate and click-through rate, which is what we were set out to do. And in doing so, we are going to get people down the funnel to making more real estate transactions. So just another way to think about how do we measure success. It might be leading indicators like conversions. Paper to digital. So we've done a number of these projects, and these types of projects are really about looking at classic forms of information and data that often exist in flat files. So what do I mean by that? For example, we might be sitting on a mountain of information that sits in paperwork or paper invoices or PDF reports or PDF images or just actual images. And all that information is being stored, and it's been sitting in an archive or a legacy reservoir or database for 10, 20, 30 years. And now we realize the importance of data, and we're actually trying to extract that information and put it into some sort of structured database. Well, how do we solve that problem? Traditionally, we might just have people do manual data entry, and they're putting the information from looking at an image and dropping it or entering it into a database or a CRM or what have you. Well, it's very labor intensive, it's very time consuming, and how might we do that in a more effective, automated way? So what we're using is now artificial intelligence to mine and extract only certain pieces of information in really these hard to reach places, fuzzy images, PDF files, etc. And we've done this for a number of clients. So what's the return on something like this? Well, it could be measured in automation and how many people who are currently performing manual data entry and how quickly they are moving this information from point A to point B, which isn't a terrible way of measuring it, right? That's easy path to value. But more importantly, what this capability actually does is it allows a business to have future machine learning opportunities and capabilities that they wouldn't otherwise have because they wouldn't have the data to do so. And this can put them into new markets. This can put them into new solutions they can provide. So for example, you can extract that information using artificial intelligence and then monetize that information. So that becomes a top line driver. You can extract this information and you can do a predictive model on top of it that informs the business to make smarter decisions. That's another return driver. So there's a lot of really cool things you can do by just using artificial intelligence to effectively data mine and then use that information as a way to measure return. Let me do one more where sometimes we're building capabilities like the previous example to allow businesses to create new products and automate a task, and sometimes change corporate value equation altogether. So for this particular use case, what we were simply doing is using computer vision to automate the inspection of vehicles, look for damage, and once we identify damage, start to quantify the impact of that damage, meaning could we even automate the quoting process to say, what would it take to fix that particular damage that the machine has identified? So that's exciting in its own right, but what's really exciting here is that as we were building this capability, That capability was then used to differentiate the business in a fundraising effort. So they were looking to capitalize and they were using a lot of their innovation programs. This was a part of it to then go to investors and say, hey, we are looking for a certain type of return on our business based on our innovation. Well, some of the work that was being done in the innovation camp, including this project, was so appealing that a company came in and made an really aggressive offer to acquire the company we were working with. So as we were rolling out a pilot of this particular capability, an acquiring company came in and said, no, we would actually prefer to own you in this capability so we can do some things taking it forward. So it's kind of amazing the different ways that one can measure return by just applying artificial intelligence or having a roadmap and moving in that direction. It truly can help you find measurable return, but even strategic return in terms of increasing corporate value, which is super, super exciting. So I'm going to stop right there, and I'd love to open the conversation for discussion. So I imagine many of you are thinking about artificial intelligence, are looking for ROI cases, or maybe have tried and are not seeing it go so successfully. Let's talk about it. What questions do you have of the content? I'm super excited to discuss with you.
All right. Well, thank you, Steve. That was super interesting. We've already received a couple questions in the chat, so we'll start with those. But if anyone has any other questions, feel free to pop them in the chat or the Q&A, either one, and I'll ask Steve them. So let's start with one that came through during the presentation. It seems RPA and process mining are the tips of the spear for AI adoption and return. What is KUNGFU.AI's view on RPA and process mining? Do you work with or compete with RPA organizations like UiPath?
Yes, big question, a couple different parts. I hope I can get all of them. The first and short answer is, in my opinion, I think RPA has the easiest path to value and is the most practical approach to start a machine learning journey. It is much easier to automate a process. And we're talking about microprocesses. Think of 3-second tasks or sequences of 3-second tasks that can augment someone to do something a little bit more higher order. Those are target-rich environments. There's clear path to value in doing that. It's more important than ever in a digital world for us to do that. And AI is really good at that. And there's very little uncertainty in its capability. Now, flip it and think about predictions. Predictions are hard. Predicting is always fuzzy in a crystal ball. Even if the AI makes a prediction, do you trust the prediction? Generally speaking, even from an engineering standpoint, making predictions is just a lot harder than it is to automate a process. And if you boil it down, most of the successful use cases you see today are RPA use cases, meaning just not necessarily robots, but just automating process. So I'm a big fan of those capabilities and those use cases because the prediction business is just a little bit more dicey. Now, the flip side of that question is, how do we compete? Obviously, we do this work. Paper to digital, which I shared with you previously, is absolutely an RPA use case. There are plenty of companies out there, UiPath, Pegasystems, Blue Prism, and a handful of others that are offering robotic process automation from a software perspective, where there's a lot of connectors that make two systems talk to one another. There's a lot of heuristic-based automation where you can basically if this, then that, your way to automation. The difference between what we do and what that is we do intelligent process automation, something that requires maybe a handful of decision-making related to a context of things that happened prior. And based on the context and the options, the machine will then kind of winnow down into the best possible outcome. Or if it's not that, it's usually RPA on top of some sort of unstructured data source. So doing RPA with image understanding, or doing RPA on top of textual-based understanding. So that's really where machine learning hops in. We would probably be great partners to a UiPath to do some of the more custom machine learning, intelligent process automation, but we'd never really compete. If you need one of them, it's likely that the level of automation you need doesn't require our services at all. So hope that answers it.
Yeah, thank you. Next question. Should a company go through a lean improvement process before it seeks to integrate AI into that space? And do you also work with clients on this full process?
I'll answer it in reverse order. Short answer is no, but we actually have a great partner in town that we trust to do that. And I would say these are parallel paths. It's the same thinking in terms of like, is it digital transformation and then AI? And the answer is likely it is, in this case, probably a parallel path where at the end of the day, you think of the business problem you want to solve. And once you understand the business problem you want to solve, create a hypothesis on how AI may solve that problem. And then from there, reverse engineer into all the pre-processes you may want to do to get to that actual solution. So sometimes it's going through some of the transformation you mentioned and using a third party to identify the hotspots on where you may want to automate or bring in intelligence. But having that outcome in mind and then working your way backwards is always a great way to think about it. And it becomes more powerful is when you can bring the different perspectives, our perspective, the process group's perspective, your team's perspective in a room together where we can strategize and formulate solutions together so that we don't head out on the wrong track or build a solution that doesn't meet the mark or even start a project that we can't finish because it got really hard and we didn't see around those corners.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Last question, unless anyone else wants to slide in with another one. Do you have any advice on how to navigate around any cultural obstacles related to ROI?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's definitely easier if you have a level of cultural readiness. Whereas you have some sort of digital literacy in the business, don't need to go through full digital transformation, but you have a strong digital literacy, you value data, you value innovation and change, you are either a market leader and you want to stay ahead, you are a challenger, or maybe someone who the market's been beaten up for a little while. And this is one of those things where you have to do something or it's going to be too late for you. All of those things, plus a willingness of your staff to embrace new technologies, are all super important. And it's not something you can teach, it's top down. And if you feel like you generally check those boxes, I think you have a good shot. I think you do need to value change management and not underestimate it. A lot of times people say, oh yeah, we can roll this out, or we totally know what we're doing once we have this capability in our hands. And the reality is we are not change management experts. There might be change management experts on this call, and they're screaming, don't underestimate change management. It's so important, because how many times have we started a technology project and rolled it out and it just sat there and it wasn't used? Or we just weren't solving the right problem in the first place. So you have to value those types of stuff. And you certainly, and most importantly, is if you have a culture of just bringing in all different perspectives together and cross collaboration between departments, that's going to get you most of the way home. And if you don't, there are things that we can do to get people in the room together to make sure that we're taking into account all perspectives. That is more of a teachable, workable thing. But it's a big question. It probably could be its own conversation / webinar.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've got one more question, and this is one that us as marketing people love to hear. What is unique about KUNGFU.AI? Is it our people, our process? What would you say is the unique secret sauce of us?
We surprisingly, and as a co-founder, it still shocks the hell out of me, we are still one of the few and only groups that I know of that do exactly what we do. Meaning we are born and intentionally an artificial intelligence services company, meaning we hire people who know this space, have studied it and gotten advanced degrees in it, and have been in industry practicing it for a very long time. And all they like to do is solve problems with machine learning. And we don't really do a whole lot else. So we are highly specialized. We are focused on building highly specialized and bespoke capabilities. And I think at the end of the day, our superpower is really bridging the last mile AI problem, where there are lots of groups that are learning this and embracing artificial intelligence as a bolt-on capability. They are having a hard time getting solutions into production, and that's really a superpower of ours. Is not only is our team not data scientists, we're machine learning engineers, and we achieve that for two reasons: one, industry experience, and two, software and DevOps experience. So we're really good at turning that capability and putting it into production, and allowing that capability to work and drive value and understand and measure that value. And it's really hard to find someone that goes full life cycle, including the management on the back end. And that's all we do. So oftentimes it's just specializing or differentiating on both capability and focus.
All right. Well, and with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. So thank you, Steve, for your time on the presentation and on the Q&A. It was really informative. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. So thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye, everyone.